Hey team, welcome back to the show. Jeremiah here today, just recording a solo episode, talking through how to get visible abs even when you are not your leanest. Now, this is what we all want, right? We all want to be able to see our abs all the time, but most people really struggle to ever get visible abs. This is a consistent goal of most clients who start with us. They do want to be able to see their abs, but even when they've gotten extremely lean, still really struggle to see much going on there. So today we're going to talk through how to fix that. Now, I think one of the biggest things holding most people back is this belief that abs are just made in the kitchen, right? You hear this all the time. Abs are made in the kitchen. What we do in the gym isn't all that important. I found in reality, most people just need to be training their abs more, which is why I have shifted most clients to a much higher frequency ab training protocol, which I find carries over very well to not only aesthetics, again, having more visible abs year round, depending on how lean we are, but also actually improves our performance. And I'll explain how this carries over to both and what a protocol like this might look like. Now, obviously, yes, we do need to be lean enough to see our abs. I'm not trying to discount that. There is, yes, the kitchen component. It's huge. We, no matter what, a high enough body fat won't be able to see our abs. Most people do underestimate how much body fat they have. So you may very well just need to be or need to get leaner than you are currently, especially if we are at a higher body fat. Things like our ab training, and if we have limited time, things like our ab training are going to be a lower priority. But as you build muscle and get leaner, only focusing on your diet to get abs is going to probably hold you back from your goal aesthetic. Most people want a pretty chiseled midsection. Just focusing on diet is going to hold us back here, because the problem most people run into is that even when they're super lean after a long diet, their midsection doesn't look the way they want because their ab muscles are underdeveloped. It's kind of like if we wanted really jacked biceps. So we just dieted to an extremely lean state. Yeah, there might not be much body fat in your arms, but they would just look skinny and we wouldn't see a whole lot of shape, a whole lot of definition there if we hadn't actually intentionally trained the muscle and built it larger. I don't know why people don't look at abs the same way here. So if this is how we've approached things, then your abs really never pop much, even when you are super lean. And this puts people in the position because a lot of times when people are like looking at their goal physique specific to a diet, they want to continue the diet until they really see their abs look the way they want. But your abs might not ever look the way you want them to until we build them more, right? So this puts people in a position where they have to be dieted down so low and be so extremely lean to kind of be able to see their abs, where there really is just a much better solution here to make them more visible. If you actually train your abs directly, properly, and often, you can build and improve their shape quite a lot. And the cool thing about this is it makes them visible at they makes them more visible rather at any given body fat percentage. So even when we're not our leanest, if our abs are larger, thicker, they will be more visible. So basically, if we want visible abs, we want to look leaner. Outside of your nutrition, one of the best things we can do is build that muscle larger. Same goes for that, but it's similar to the bicep example that I used before. So the approach that we're going to be talking through here, this kind of high frequency ab training approach, I've been using with a lot of clients lately, means it's easier for us to look leaner year round without having to be dieted to your leanest all the time. Now, I also want to be realistic with the difference this will make. It will make a considerable difference if you've never trained your abs well, but no matter what, you're probably going to have to be a decent bit below an average American's level of body fat to have your abs all that visible. But this will make a considerable difference. So this is a huge aspect, is just training our abs properly. Most people are just missing in a large part the ab development that they need. So if you are someone who has dieted down to a lean physique and does not ever see the shape that you want in your midsection regardless, you probably need to focus on better training your abs. Now, another common myth you'll hear is this idea that just doing compound movements like squats and deadlifts is going to be plenty to build your abs because you use your core to stabilize. Now, yes, it is true. We're going to use our core to stabilize for those movements. And us training movements like squats, deadlifts, or compound movements that really utilize our core will get us better at bracing, stabilizing our pelvis, stabilizing our spine. But the thing to understand here is we are more so using there like our obliques, our TVA. We are using our rectus abdominis, aka our six-pack muscle to a degree, but it's not really all that involved here. Now, when we're looking at the aesthetic development side of things, again, our rectus abdominis, again, think of this as like actually your visible six-pack muscle. There are multiple muscles that make up our core. It is far from just our abs. Even like think of like the core is so much more than just like your people just think of your ab muscles, but there's so much more going on there. But like let's keep this specific to abs. We of course like have our obliques, our TVA, we have our rectus abdominis. And in this case, the rectus abdominis is really what we're trying to develop. But again, it is not going to be all that involved when we're looking at just static stabilization, right? So here we're talking about anti-movement. When we're talking about movements like squats and deadlifts, we're talking about not letting your spine move a whole lot. The thing is, your rectus abdominis' main function is flexing and rounding your spine. So movements where you flex your spine and extend your spine. So think like at the bottom of a crunch where a rib cage is pulled close to our pelvis, or top of a crunch, I guess, where a rib cage is pulled close to our pelvis, our spine is flexed. When we come back up, so we straighten or even extend our spine a little bit, of course our spine is extended. This is going to be how we're actually training our rectus abdominis. So bringing it back to that bicep example, us just doing like a squat or deadlift and hoping to build our abs is kind of like us carrying around, like us just holding a heavy weight in our hand, like doing a heavy farmer's carry, and hoping that will really build massive biceps. Whereas us doing a movement where we flex and extend our spine is going to be like actually doing a bicep curl. We're actually directly training the tissue, which is going to be so important here. So when we're looking at movements that will do this well, a few that I really like are going to be a cable crunch. Probably one of my favorites as when we're initially really trying to teach someone how to move their spine well. A machine crunch is a really good option, a decline crunch, a decline gar hammer raise, a captain's chair leg raise, hanging knee raise. I do like an ab wheel as well. Ab wheel kind of being like a hybrid between a crunch and more of an isometric hold. But can really be quite good for teaching someone like proper pelvic positioning or really stabilizing the pelvis. So I do like the carryover that has to like a movement like an RDL, for example. But here, basically, again, what we're looking at when we want to develop our rectus abdominis better, which we need for more visible abs, is movements where we are pulling our rib cage closer to our pelvis or our pelvis closer to our rib cage. Now, when we're talking about performance and how this helps performance, one of the biggest takeaways that I had from Prescript, Prescript Level 1 course we as a team worked through this last year, was just how important your ability to move your spine well is for achieving the best positions to build muscle and staying pain-free in your training. But the problem is most people really can't move their spine well at all. If you have someone like try to do a cable crunch, it's almost like their entire spine is stiff and rigid, and they basically can only move at the hips. Where if we can really move our spine well, that allows us to position ourselves in movements like our presses, to a degree our pulling movements, honestly, like most everything. If we can move better here, we will have much better function and be able to train much more pain-free. So again, most people can't do this extremely well. So I've really liked integrating ab work for clients as one of their primer movements. Typically what I'll do is I'll have a couple primer movements for someone before going into a training session to help quote unquote warm them up for said session. So think like if we're going into an upper body day, I might want them practicing like upwardly rotating their scaps, downwardly rotating their scaps. So we cover like most of our scapular movement and then flexing, extending our spine, okay? Which would be something like a crunch. If we take those boxes, hey, we're probably going to feel quite good going into this session. So here, again, with just like 2-3 quick movements, and again, as I mentioned, one of those potentially being something like a crunch, this is multifaceted. It's super effective for both improving performance and aesthetics. From the performance perspective, again, if we're implementing some type of ab movement, again, like potentially a cable crunch, a machine crunch, I do, again, really, really like a cable crunch in this instance before an upper body day, we're getting their spine more mobile, which will lead to better performance in the session. We're practicing really being able to move well out of the spine, but we're also going to be taking this movement close to failure, right? So maybe I'm having them make a client do 3 movements. The other 2, again, those more focused on scapular movement. hey, we're going to leave plenty in the tank here. I don't want you pushing this too hard. This ab movement, we're probably going to take this to like 0 to 1 RIR, right? Because I want us to take this close to failure and actually provide the stimulus that we need to build more visible abs. The other thing that I really like about putting this at the start of the session as the primer is most people are a lot less likely to skip or half-ass their ab movements, unlike when they're tacked on at the end of the session. So abs and calves, when we put them at the end of the session, speaking from the heart here because I hate calf training, when we put them at the end of the session, best case, people typically just aren't very intentional with it. They kind of go through the motions. Worst case, a lot of times people just skip it. Whereas here, it's at the start of the session, and it is a lot easier for us to just be intentional with it. People are excited, they're ready to go. We're not too tired yet. So we can, again, it's not going to fatigue us much at all for our actual training session, but allows us to just train that so much more effectively and get so much more out of it. Now, again, we need to understand that most people aren't good at training their abs, aka moving their spine at first, or training their rectus abdominis, aka moving their spine at first. So even if we are using like a higher frequency protocol, like I'm talking about here, we won't build them until we can actually train them well. So if you are someone who is training your abs a lot, but you're not seeing progress, you are probably making one of these mistakes. First thing to understand is, again, we need to actually train them like any other muscle. I don't know if this is still a thing. Like, I don't know if people are still doing like whole ab days where you would do like 1,000 crunches or anything like that. We don't need to be doing shit like that. Just like any other muscle to grow, your abs need to experience significant tension and need to be trained close to failure. So we don't need to use like 100 rep sets, like doing a ton of bodyweight crunches, unless like somewhere between 8 and 20 reps we can hit failure. Doing 8 to 20 or doing like a bodyweight crunch, this is probably something that we're going to load. Now, we typically need to load if we're doing something like a crunch. We're typically going to need to add load here to bring your rectus abdominis close to fail. If you're doing something like a gar hammer raise, basically if you're doing something where you're pulling your rib cage closer to your pelvis, we typically need to add load. If we're doing something where we're pulling our pelvis closer to our rib cage, so think like a hanging leg raise or a reverse crunch. Very rarely do we actually need to add load if you're doing that correctly. Your legs create such a long lever, kind of like with like a dumbbell lateral raise, how you can't lift nearly as much weight as you can do for a dumbbell shoulder press. Our legs just create such a long lever, and our lower body is typically quite heavy. Unless you have little calves like mine, then yours isn't as heavy as most. But point of that being, we typically don't need to load those movements where we're pulling our pelvis closer to our rib cage. But that's one of the biggest mistakes, is people just cranking out a bunch of reps, not really considering, am I getting closer to failure? And then also, we need to record our progressions here and focus on progressing over time, getting stronger over time, just like any other muscle group. We don't need a crazy amount of volume. Again, we don't need to do an entire ab day. Really, like, this might just be 3-ish. Like, for a lot of people, this might just be, hey, maybe we're doing 3 movements, 2 sets each per week. And if we train this well, train this effectively, we can definitely grow. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But the biggest thing most people are making is they're not executing the actual movements well. So this is why we ask clients for a lot of form videos to review and get feedback on until we get this mastered. And one thing I'm almost always requesting from clients when they start, even if abs aren't part of their goal, is, hey, I want to see what one of your crunches looks like, because almost everyone is butchering this. So if we look at just a cable crunch, this is a very common example most people mess up. Most people aren't flexing their spine at all when they are doing that crunch. Basically what they're doing is, okay, so you start the cable crunch, you are on your knees, you have the cable next to your head. And basically what people do is they push their hips back and they just flex at the hips. Basically, they sit back so their butt comes close to their heels and their rib cage comes down closer to their knees. They don't actually round their spine. We're not really doing a whole lot to train our rectus abdominis there. Again, we really want a lot of spinal movement here. Here, like in the example I just laid out, we're moving more at the hips than actually moving at the spine. What we want is, so imagine we are at the top of a cable crunch we're about to start. The cues I would typically talk a client through are, okay, put your hip joint right over your knee joint. Now, I want you to keep your hip joint over your knee joint through the entire rep here as we crunch down. Most people are going to want to sit back, shift their weight back. We don't want that. We want to stay right there, hip joint over knee joint, and then keep that rope next to your head or kind of glued on top of your head. I like that for most people. This is another mistake a lot of people make. Like as they're crunching down in that cable crunch, they will actually move their hands back, like next to their neck. What I find is for a lot of people that prevents us from being able to flex our spine as much. I typically tell people like your wrist joint, think that's kind of glued to the top back of your head. If you like have a ponytail, depending on if you wear ponytails or not, it's probably going to be like your wrist or like right next to where that would be. And we want to keep it glued there the entire time. Then imagine we are trying to, you could think pull your rib cage to your pelvis. I really like, hey, imagine you're trying to drive your head between your knees. And again, we want to round our spine as much as possible here. There, we will really have shortened the rectus abdominis. And then when we come back up, we don't want to let our torso come all the way upright. So again, at our start position, we'll kind of be where our torso is parallel with the floor. As we come up, you want to stretch the rectus abdominis a bit more. You want to let your rib cage flare a bit, but you want to almost imagine you're trying to keep your lower back parallel with the floor, right? Whereas what a lot of people do is they don't really let their rib cage open up as they come up. They just kind of almost like sit up to where their torso is no longer parallel with the floor and they're actually kind of more upright. We don't want to let that happen because again, then we won't be getting as much of a stretch. We'll be on our rectus abdominis. We'll be losing a lot of tension. So think like almost trying to keep your lower back parallel with the floor as you come up. More so, just like your upper back is moving and you're really just opening up your rib cage. So probably the biggest mistakes most people are making, like if you are training your abs a lot and we're not seeing any progress there, again, not treating them like any other muscle group, not pushing them close enough to failure. We don't need a ton of volume. We don't need whole ab days. Really, we don't need a whole lot of specific ab work at all if we do it effectively. And finally, most people just aren't training their rectus abdominis properly. Now, an application with a lot of clients, what this protocol might look like, what this approach might look like. And again, now this will vary from person to person, depending on where their priorities are. So also work with a decent amount of people who are newer to this. And hey, maybe we are just kind of trying to make this a habit. We're just kind of trying to get into the swing of things. I'm just trying to figure out the nutrition. I have very limited time to train. We're not super excited about training yet. Am I going to have that person train abs 3 to 4 days a week? No, I just want them mastering the basics. Now, this is like if the goal is to have the most aesthetic physique possible, which is for a lot of people the goal who work with us, this is going to be a lot higher priority. But if we're just getting into it, not so much. So like if you're a coach yourself or you are kind of just getting into things, please understand like where this falls on our priorities. But again, for anyone who is more intermediate to advanced, especially, I really like this approach. It does carry over so much to the aesthetic side of things. It helps from like a prehab side of things. It helps with performance. So it is very multifaceted. So with a lot of, and again, that's going to be the majority of the clients we work with, like intermediate plus individuals. What this will look like is 3 to potentially even 4 days a week. I am probably going to be incorporating some type of ab movement in their primer. I would say 3 days a week is probably going to be the most common. If someone really wants to prioritize this and they seem to prioritize ab development, they seem to recover well, definitely not opposed to 4 days a week either. But again, probably going to be at the start of 3 to 4 of our training days. Just 2 to 3 sets here is plenty. Typically going to be something like 8 to 15 reps. I really, in this instance, if we go below that, if we load that too heavy, not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily, but if we push loading too much, I find a lot of people just get a little bit sloppier with their technique. Specifically for this, like when we're talking about like a cable crunch, which is going to be a movement that's going to be more challenging in the short position. If we're loading this extremely heavy, a lot of times people will kind of just launch at the start of the rep, like yank that weight down, and momentum will carry them into the short position more where we actually want the muscle working the most, because that's where, again, this is going to be the most challenging. We're probably going to be like, it's kind of like a glute bridge where that short position is where we're really trying to squeeze out the most benefits here. We're not going to get as much out of the more lengthened position for like this movement specifically. So if we're using momentum to kind of carry us into that, we're not going to get as much out of that short position versus if we are doing that in a more controlled manner. So I find just a lot of times us loading too heavy leads to people launching. So that's where if we're getting into like 5 reps, do I like that as much here? No, not typically. But like an 8 to 15-ish rep range tends to lend itself quite well to most of our like rectus abdominis training. Once we get past 15-ish reps, honestly, people I think just get bored. Just get there's not like a lot of cardiovascular fatigue here, but people just get bored or less intentional about it and kind of just have done a lot of reps and stopped the set. We're less likely to get close to failure. And just one movement per training day. So again, probably 3 to 4 times a week, 2 to 3 sets, 8 to 15 reps, one movement per training day. And if we're training our abs well, this is enough to see a considerable difference. If we've gone from not training our abs well at all to we're nailing this, basically we've mastered all these principles, execution and the intensity being the most important part of this. Just again, doing one movement, 2 to 3 sets, 3 times per week. In 3-4 months, we can see a pretty considerable difference in someone's ab development, especially if this coincides with like a body recomposition or a fat loss phase. So basically here, by using a higher frequency approach, we get better at movement, better at training, which also helps us build more muscle outside of just our abs. But better ab development also means we will look leaner, even if you are not at your lowest body fat. So again, if you are someone who has struggled to see your abs never really look the way you want to, even when you are dieted down. And again, we do need to be lean enough. As I said before, a lot of people underestimate how much body fat they have and how much body fat they need to get to visible abs. But if we've truly gotten quite lean and abs just really don't show up, or you don't want to have to be dieted down to your absolute lowest to have some semblance of abs, I would look at actually training them properly and probably training them more than you are currently. So that is what I have for y'all for today. Hopefully this was helpful. If you enjoy the show, do me a huge favor, leave us a 5-star rating or review. Just helps expand our reach, helps us get the podcast out to more people. If you would like to apply for coaching with our team, hit the link in the show notes, and I will catch you guys next time.